Well, hello again. Welcome back to Rebel Culture. I'm Art Perry, also known as Professor Art, and I've been thinking. That happens now and again. A lot of what we're dealing with in these podcasts is philosophical, right? It's not just about culture and, our entry into the creative ideas of others, but it's also this whole idea of how we relate to a reality, our reality, the reality of others, because we're aware, we're aware we exist. I think, therefore I am, like Descartes said. Where does culture fit into this, right? Well, culture is the testament for humanity. It's what we have. Throughout history, every epic, epoch, every epoch, every time is defined and remembered by its history. Egypt, the incredible art and their culture and their hieroglyphics and Luxor and Abu Simbel and all those absolutely stupendous things that we have. And so we're living in this age. We dealt a little bit with Albert Camus, the French existentialist. And, I revisited him to get the podcast together. And he sort of jingle jangled my thinking about absurdity, the absurdity of life, right? It's absurd that we're here. It's absurd that uh, we're aware that we're here. What do I mean by absurd? Well, it really makes no sense. Now, if you want to find a reason for that absurdity, you can use religion, right? Faith in destiny being defined by a force greater than we are. That's good. That's good. That's hinging yourself on something that you can't control, so you can coast down the river. The in the drunken boat, like Arthur Rimbaud talks about. But then there's the idea that if it's absurd, how if you don't want to, if you want to have some control, if you just don't want to be in a drunken boat, uh, what do we have, right? Well, what we have is what's called hope. And Albert Camus talks a lot about hope, how instead of having faith in a greater being, right, some great force that we can just relax with, destiny is not in our hands, or we can hope that we ourselves can become enlightened in that sort of Buddhist sense, that you gain awareness by life experiences, by your karma. If you do good things will come to you, etc. And all of this comes through, I think, in culture. The and what I was thinking about was I was thinking about the rebels, how rebels see the world uniquely. Uh, their rebelliousness is a need for truth, right? They need to see for themselves through the absurdity. That's what they do. Now, I was going to start today off, and I am going to start today's podcast off. I had this idea, another idea. Why not pick um, someone that fits into our romp, our rebel romp here, uh, who has a birthday today? So I chose the American photographer, Diane Arbus. Now, I'm sure most of you have seen her images if you're not familiar with the name. And she is singular. She is someone who, speaking of outsiders and misfits and so forth within rebel culture, she sought them out to befriend and photograph them. Uh, she was a street photographer. She wanted to meet unique and singular individuals who were on the margins of society, and not as a voyeur, but as someone who understood the specialness of these people, which included people in carnivals and sideshows, you know, entertainers like strippers and so forth, and also uh, people who were challenged, right, in their on what they were given, right. Her final series of works before she unfortunately took her own life was a series dealing with people in an institution who had Down syndrome, and she did these breathtakingly um, insightful but chillingly raw photos of these these people. Halloween, wearing their masks and so forth. All her work is so deeply empathetic, right? So you she's been criticized by those who perhaps don't give her the breadth of understanding she deserves. That her work is, she was a thrill seeker. She came from a wealthy family. She grew up just off Central Park. Her father ran a department store, and she grew up with nannies and chauffeurs with gloves and, a privileged upbringing. But uh, Deanne Arbus defined herself by searching out and celebrating um, people on the fringes of society. Now, I think she fits into. Like I didn't know I was going to get into kind of a bit of a dark jag today, but when I started thinking about Deanne Arbus and I started thinking about something else, I'll explain momentarily about a performance I saw last week. That you know, there are people who have become uh, maybe let's call them. I don't know. It's so tough putting words to someone and get them down to like tragic martyr. It's so ripe with you know negativity when in fact I was thinking about all these people, creative people who were trying to find their own voice, who were driven by the hope of expressing themselves, and they were dealing with burdens of mental illness, right? Dealing with bipolar, dealing with schizophrenia, dealing with deep chronic depression. Now, I'm no, psychiatrist, and I don't, you know, pretend to know that much about it. All I know is from my own experience and from understanding many of these people we're dealing with that so many creative rebels are tender spirits. the reason they can see things and express things the way they do is because uh, they're tender. They feel things more deeply. They don't just toss off their feelings, but they go deeper into them, and then they try to find a way to share those so that they can understand themselves and the world around them. And ergo we do too through what they do. But I was thinking about so many of these people tragically took their own lives in different ways. Not only Deanne Arbus, but we can think of Sylvia Plath, Mark Rothko, Marilyn Monroe, more recently Kurt Cobain. And then there's the other side, the side of addiction, where uh, Deanne Arbus often said it's all chemical, right? That you know yourself, if you have a few drinks, it changes you. It changes your chemistry, and you feel a different way. For people who are uh, addicts, that becomes their algebra of need, as William Burroughs, who was a longtime, junkie, heroin user. That's what he talked about, the algebra of need, and that that self-destructive side, that sort of non-controllable side, often leads these people into that area of rebelness, not following the uh, the social codes that they're sort of restricted by, so they will be accepted, but to go somewhere else. And I think about all these people that we're going to talk a bit today about a number of them, but I just want to start off. We'll start with Deanne Arbus, and we'll celebrate her. It is her birthday, and here's a photo that was taken uh, of her, and was taken as she did. She uh, walked around in Central Park in New York and took photos of people. Uh, the writer Norman Mailer said that giving a camera to Dan Arbus is like giving a grenade to a baby. And what he meant by that was, and he knew her, she took a very famous photo of him. Uh, what he meant was that as a person, she was um, very frail, she had a rather high, squeaky voice, and she had a very mild way of approaching people. And that's the other thing about documentary work, street photography, or whatever label you want, where you're not in control. You're not bringing people into a studio and controlling the lighting, controlling the posing, having makeup people, and get a photo. And no matter who it is, you know it's going to be a good photo, right? You do, test Polaroids to make sure everything's okay. Street photographer, you have the instant, right? Cartier-Bresson's decisive moment. Deanne Arbus's frame of mind framed her work, right? So when she would photograph someone, there was this connection between her and her subject. There wasn't an objectification. There was a personality connection. And you can see that in her images, even her more casual ones. Her images ended up having kind of an inner explosive quality, I think. A dramatic sense of living theater, right? They weren't, her images never looked indifferent. They always looked engaged. All great portraiture whether it's by painters like Goya or, was another example, maybe Lucien Freud, great portraitists. Uh, they're not just about skin and fabric and pose. It's about the psychological connection, the empathy and understanding of the artist to the subject. And um, very few photographers can, have that connection that Deanne Arbus had. Probably none, with the kind of people she took photos of. So this is one of her best images. It's called, she named it, Identical Twins, uh, Rossall, New Jersey. Deanne Arbus searched out people who had a certain uniqueness, and she became aware of a celebration. I believe it was at Christmas time, a Christmas celebration in New Jersey for twins and triplets. Wow! So she figured, yeah, I'll go and see what's happening, and she. How can I put this? Deanne Arbus admired people who created their own identities from what they were given or assumed identities, extremists, rebels, what were at that time called freaks, people that were in sideshows or had physical abnormalities. And she often became friends with these people, right? She befriended them and got to know them. So when she photographed them, there wasn't an indifference. There was some connection. And I think that's really, really important. So these two twins were the Wade sisters. The Wade sisters. And the Wade sisters, like many of Arbus's subjects, because her works become so notable now, they became, they got a particular kind of celebrity status just because they were photographed by her. And in a second, I'll talk about Grenade Boy, right? And his, the way his life was in many ways directed by this momentary photo in Central Park that Diane Arbus took. Um, the father of the twins, of the Wade twins, hated this photo. He despised it. He, in fact, said that, she made my daughters look ghastly. I think he used the word ghastly. She did take away the layers, right? This is not like a happy school photo. This is something else. And the differences between them, right? The one is smiling just a bit, the other one is not. And the speaking about the father, as she always did, and it's practice among photographers, if you take someone's portrait, you give them a copy of the print. And Deanne Arbus gave a copy of her print to the father, who put it in the trunk and left it there. He couldn't stand it. Years later, he decided to sell it, and it was valued at $500,000. So there you go. Final reference to the Wade sisters in this photo, which of the twins, which was put on the first monograph of Deanne Arbus's work. This is the photos from the cover, the Aperture photo book. Stanley Kubrick, when he was doing The Shining, directing the famous film The Shining with Jack Nicholson, he incorporated the two twins, these sort of frightening image of two girl twins standing in the hallway. And that was directly taken from this particular photograph. So Deanne Arbus, as a rebel, had a way of seeing the world, and it was the way she was maybe not comfortable with, but it's one that she had to investigate, right? She had to resolve for herself, right? The peculiarities of existence. And nobody, I think, did it better. The other factor about Deanne Arbus and her eventual sad and tragic death by suicide was she was bipolar. And as I say, I'm in no way a psychiatrist, but it is something where you have mood changes. In her writings, she was quite the person for putting her thoughts into a journal. She talked about her state of mind and how it sometimes she couldn't even walk out of her door or go across the street. You know, she was frozen by fear and anxiety. Yet when she was in on the move, she was just a visionary, a total visionary. What she did. So it was this duality in her, the extremities of her thoughts and her abilities that made her great, but also was so self-destructive to her. Here's another photo, and this is the one I just mentioned briefly. One taken in 1962 called "The Child with Toy Hand Grenade in Central Park." Okay. This is Colin Wood. He's a young boy who was wandering around on his own in Central Park because his parents were meeting with a lawyer about an impending divorce. So they said to Colin, go play in the park, and Mommy and Daddy are dealing with this. And so she encountered him, Colin, in the park, took this photo. There's a number of other photos that she took, and some of them he looked more, happy. But this particular moment where all of his personal feelings and anger at where his life was going, being ditched in the park and whatever, he gave this look, this grimace, this, and thereafter in his life, he went on to become, I think he formed some sort of production company, which he called Grenade Boy Productions. He lived under the shadow of this print. And it's that one, fleck of an instant when he bumped into Deanne Arbus in the park made him part of history, and that is the power and also the in many ways sort of the curse, right? The idea of fame, the idea of notoriety, the idea of being recognized, being having your privacy, intrusions in your privacy. Anyway, here's another photo. I'll go through some of these. I just want to give you an idea, and I'm celebrating her. I mean, this is a photograph called Puerto Rican Woman with a Beauty Mark. Now, Deanne Arbus said very clearly that the first thing we see about someone is their flaw. Whether they have a mole, whether they whatever. You notice their physicality, their quirks, their that's the first thing you notice about someone. What's not normal, what's out, and she said that she wanted to celebrate whatever that uniqueness is, whatever that perceived flaw is, because it made the person, as I say, unique and individual. She said about photography that a photograph is a secret about a secret. The more it tells you, the less you know. I think that's kind of paramount to what she did, right? It was this. These people did have secrets. They were they lived lives that revolved around a. Well, here's an example. This is the Jewish giant taken at home with his parents in 1970, just a year before her death, and he's a giant. He's also a real person, right? He's Eddie Carmel, and Eddie lived to the age of 36 and died in 1972, just the year after Deanne passed away. And he was someone who, and his parents, allowed Deanne Arbus to come into his home to get this monumentally unforgettable image. A final quote or two by Deanne Arbus. I think it's very imperative that we revisit the thoughts of these people instead of assuming. There's a lot of critical writing, and I've done a lot myself over the years. But when you go to the mother lode, you go to the actual writings of people, it's very, very, it reveals a lot, even through interpretation. At least you're dealing with we've talked a lot about authenticity and truth. Well, there you go. So one of her quotes about people like Eddie here, the giant, she said, there was a quality of legend about freaks. I remember when I was growing up, I would go to, fairs and so forth, and they would have these. Sometimes it was fake. You'd have, alligator woman, and you go in, there'd be this poor young woman who was put into a costume to look like an alligator or whatever. But other times there were people who were sadly deformed, and they would be on display. People would come in and laugh and ridicule. It was harsh, but she was not ridiculing them. She would go and talk to them and their families and so forth. And so she said again, there's a quality of legend about freaks, like a person in a fairy tale who stops you and demands that you answer a riddle. So almost as if they were special, people with wisdom. Most people go through life dreading that they'll have a traumatic experience. Freaks were born with their trauma, she said. They've already passed their test in life. They're aristocrats. So I'm going to leave Deanne Arbus now. And if you get a chance, I would recommend this particular book. It's a catalog. It's massive, yeah, but it's a catalog from 2003 when there was a huge retrospective called Revelations. And it's got all her works and very great discussions on things. And the title comes from a quote, which is at the beginning of the book, which is, and the revelation was a little like that saints receive on mountains. a further chapter in the history of the mystery. All right, we'll leave that vibrating in the air to think about. So I'm going to try to use a bit of synchronicity here and move into talking about a husband and wife team, singers, songwriters, from Albuquerque, New Mexico, who go under the name of the Handsome Family. And this couple, Renee and Brett Sparks, deal with imagery and outsider lives and so forth, just in the way Dan Arbus did. And they're gloriously quirky. For a long while, they had a pet octopus in their bathtub, you know. All right. And, but the jibing hook between the two is they did a song called The Giant of Illinois. And the Giant of Illinois was an actual person. His name was Robert Wadlow, and he was almost 9 feet tall, died at the age of 22. And they did this song where they recounted his last days, where he was at a fair and he had a brace on his foot for support and so forth, and it caused an infection, and that ended up by creating going to his bloodstream, and it caused him to pass away. Now, the words to the song, the beginning is the giant of Illinois died from a blister on his toe after the walking all day through the first winter's snow. Again, empathy, pathos. When you realize that we talked at the beginning of this podcast about the idea of absurdity. Things can be absurd, but it doesn't mean that they don't fit in, right? And there's a kind of compassion that a lot of people within rebel culture have for other rebels. They may not be creative artists, but they're people who they can feel a kinship with, and certainly the Sparks, Renee and Brett have that connection. Now, here's a photo of the Handsome Family, which I took years ago, 2009, after I'd become, aware of them. And last podcast, number 3, near the end of it, I discussed how I really feel almost a talisman-like acquaintance with things that have been like a signed photo, a signed first edition book. There's something about the actual people that have done these works I admire, whether it's a book or a recording, or if I've taken their photo, where they sign it. They actually, and so the Handsome Family, who, as I say, were photographed in 2009, they returned to Vancouver, to the same venue, the Biltmore Cabaret, last week. And I got to reconnect with them, which was glorious. And I gave them a photo from 2009, which was signed. and Brett wrote on their old times, making a reference to time and so forth. There are these people who drop into your life, right? Who have the voices, who have the their way of introducing things to you, uh, makes it seem okay. And I remember a little personal story. Uh, so I used to do lectures in a large theater hall at the university. So what it was, for the first year introduction to art history, to visual culture, do whatever I was dealing with. And there was like 100 people or so in the audience. And often these classes were at 8:30 in the morning. So what I do is I come in and I put on some music. So they would, when they were arriving, they'd be listening to something. And I always put on music that would shake them up a little, get them thinking, get them going, get the so augment the caffeine they were drinking. And I don't know, what would I put in? I put in something like John Zorn and an album like Naked City that he did, where it's based on the photography of Ouija, and there's a real it's bound to wake you up. So I um, used CDs at that time. I had my CD I was going to put into the player, and I pushed the button and it opened, and there was someone had left a CD in there. So I took it out, put it aside, put mine in, gave him a lecture. Back in my office, I got all my papers together, and there was this CD that had been left in the CD player. So this is 1998. So 1998. So I put it into a little cassette player I had in my office, and I started listening. Well, I wasn't ready. This was like revelatory. I And it was a Hanson family. It was their album called Through the Trees from that year, 1998. And I don't know who it was. I tried to find out which faculty member or student or who would have. Um, there was no case there or anything, just the CD. Um, but the first recording, the first cut on this CD was one called Weightless Again. Uh, Instantly, I realized the poetic brilliance and depth of this band, right? I'd never heard of them, right? Handsome Family. I thought, when I saw the name, I thought it was some, country and western group. Rene usually does the lyrics, and Brett does the music, but they do share, their lives and experiences, and they put it all together. Um, let's finish up with the Hanson Family. Um, Bear with me on this. I'd like to put on the photographs that I took a week ago uh, of the Hanson Family, and I'd love to play a bit of their music, but I can't do that, copyright and so forth. So what I'll do is I'll put on a handful of the images, and I'll read you the lyrics to one of their most outstanding and unforgettable songs called So Much Wine. So, yeah, just take a second or two. I had nothing to say on Christmas Day when you threw all your clothes in the snow, when you burnt your hair, knocked over chairs. I just tried to stay out of your way. But when you fell asleep with blood on your teeth, I got in my car and drove away. Listen to me, butterfly. There's only so much wine you can drink in one life, and it will never be enough to save you from the bottom of your glass. Okay, so we'll leave the Handsome family now. So the last note I want to make about the Handsome family is something that relates back to Diane Arbus, and I'll finish up by talking about an artist whose name is Richard Dadd. Brett Sparks, here's a photo I took of him the other week. He's someone who suffers from bipolar, just the way that Dan Arbus did. And in the 1990s, he was institutionalized. And when he re-entered the world after that experience, he and Rene put together that album, which still moves me to this day, Through the Trees, with Weightless again. And there's a song on there dealing more specifically with his institutionalization. And so many of these people, and I say this over and over, they surmount their sensitivities to be great. To why is there such a depth, a wisdom, artistic brilliance in the work of a Handsome family or in the work of Dan Arbus? It's because they're able to emotionally go to places most of us can't, and they come back and they relate it. And I wanted to mention this one recording artist before I get into Richard Dadd and his incredible paintings. There was a singer in the 1960s who fronted a band that had a garage hit back in the day called You're Gonna Miss Me. And it was a guy called Rocky Erickson. And Rocky Erickson just, like Brian Wilson, like many people, was able to gloriously create music for the ages. And after the success in the 60s of his band and so forth, he started performing on stage and speaking gibberish. Rocky Erickson. He would get on stage, and he obviously was having a serious breakdown. And he was institutionalized for, I believe, 4 years in total, and given electric convulsive treatments and so forth. And he came out, and with a Handsome family did Through the Trees, he in 1980 recorded an album, which is just as darkly beautiful, called The Evil One from 1980. And I don't want to overload the smorgasbord for you here, but if you get a chance, do listen to Rocky Erickson. His songs like I Walk with Zombies, one of my favorites called Stand for the Fire Demon, or one that you could imagine from the title. It's called Bloody Hammer. And a lot of his songs come from his nightmares from the drugs and the things that happened to him when he was institutionalized. Um, a special series of songs. He passed away a number of years ago, but Rocky Erickson, brilliant, brilliant man. Okay, speaking of brilliance, speaking of institutionalization, Richard Dadd. Richard Dadd was an artist. He lived in the 19th century from 1817 to 1886. And when he was 30, he was, well, he believed that his dad was the devil. He was delusionary. He was um, probably a paranoid schizophrenic. And to free himself from his devilish dad, he killed him. He he murdered his father, and for that, of course, he was put into Bethlehem, or also called Bedlam. You've heard the term. That's what it comes from. This institution for the mentally ill, and Richard Dadd spent over 40 years in institutions. First in Bethlehem, and then in a place called Broadmoor. And while he was institutionalized for the majority of his life, he did artwork. And the painting he's working on, I'll show it to you now. It's called Contradiction, Oberon and Titania. He saw fairies, right? He Richard Dadd. If you think of that great scene in Blue Velvet, the David Lynch film, where it goes down into the grass and you see all the life and the what's happening when you magnify this one little patch. That's what his art's like. It's unbearably claustrophobic, but unbearably detailed. Here's one of my favorite paintings he did. It's called The Bacchanalian Scene from 1862, and it shows a Maenad. A Maenad is an ancient Greek female, follower of Bacchus. Bacchus, the god of wine, and and there are a couple of satyrs there, or satyrs. These again mythical creatures that were sort of the drunken gods of the woodland anyway, and they had often ears of horses or goats, or they were these hybrid creatures. Fascinating stuff. Anyway, that's what he painted, Richard Dadd, in these very, very tight, small paintings that draw. You're pushed right into these paintings. You're fascinated by them, and his most famous work is a work that, if you have seen it, you're never going to forget it. Right? It's in the Tate Gallery, the Tate Britain, not the Tate Modern. The Tate Britain, it has the works of William Blake and Turner and so forth. And it's called The Fairy Feller's Masterstroke. Now, you may say, hey, I remember that. That name rings a bell. Well, that's because there was one of the people who was enchanted by this work of art when he saw it was Freddie Mercury from Queen. Now, a couple of years ago in 2023, there was an auction of Freddie Mercury's things. It included everything from cookie jars to his books to furniture and so forth. And one of the things that was up for grabs in the auction was a page he'd ripped from a magazine and framed up in a delightful gold frame. And it was an image of the Richard Dad's painting, A Fairy Feller's Masterstroke. So if you look at the work, the fairy feller is cracking open what, an acorn, a nut on the ground. You know, madness, they call it. Others call it absolute genius. I just want to leave it here. I think that's enough on Art's Ramble for today. A overarching idea, which I didn't know I was going to get into today, but I started with Dan Arbus. Then I thought of Richard Dad, and I just, met the Hanson family and renewed my acquaintance with them and seeing their performance and realizing how utterly magnificent they are and singular in this world, is this idea of what I labeled at the beginning, so rebel madness. And it's madness is it's a loaded word, but what I want to express from the little that I know about it is that so many of these people who are on the outside of things go inside themselves. There's a personal depth of introspection and revelation that sometimes comes from a skewed wiring, what Dan Arbus called it's all chemical. But out of that manifests art like no others, and art that we relate to because of our own state of mind. I guess that's a wrap, right? I just want to say that I hope that today's, umbrella of rebel madness, as I call it, shows how these visionaries, like shaman, like seers, Arthur Rimbaud talks about wanting to be a seer. They go so deep within themselves to bring out these enlightenments. So that's it. I hope you come back for the next installment of Art Rambling. And as I say, keep the quest alive, because we never give up. And I know you know at least one rebel. It may be yourself. So give yourself a hug, or if it's someone else, give them a hug. Give a rebel a hug, and I'll see you next time we get together. So, ciao for now.